The early winter air over Silver Creek carried a brittle stillness, the kind that made even the tall pines along the ridges stand a little straighter, as if listening for something they feared might return. Caleb Hart pushed open the screen door of his rental cabin and stepped onto the porch, the cold biting at his cheeks, crisp enough to remind him of mornings long buried under years of deliberate forgetting. At 61, his frame was still broad-shouldered, the type of build that once made younger recruits stand a little taller when he entered the rescue bay. His hair, now mostly iron gray, lay in uneven layers, as if he had cut it himself with the indifference of a man who no longer expected to be looked at closely. Deep lines marked the corners of his eyes, a pair of tired, slate-blue eyes that had seen smoke, collapse, loss, and the reluctant mercy of survival more times than he could count. His beard, silver, threaded with black, had grown rugged over the past few weeks, the kind that came not from fashion, but from forgetting to care. At his side, Max padded forward with the quiet, deliberate steps of an aging soldier. The German Shepherd was 7, his coat a thick blend of sable and tan. The fur along his back rougher, where a scattering of faded scars cut through it, remnants of a life spent working, warning, saving alongside Caleb during their years in urban rescue. His eyes were a deep amber, older than they should have been, and when he tilted his head, one ear stood higher than the other, permanently bent from an accident that neither of them liked to think about. Caleb knelt, running a hand along Max's neck. "Cold one, buddy," he murmured, but what he really meant was, "Stay with me a little longer. I still need you." Max nudged his arm with a gentle firmness, sensing the shift in his tone. They had long shared a language without words, one built from years crawling through rubble, listening for the faintest scratch beneath concrete, trusting each other's instincts in the darkness of collapsed corridors. Silver Creek didn't know the full story behind why Caleb had left the city, why he had traded a lifetime of sirens and shattered nights for the quiet ache of a small mountain town. The locals respected him because he carried himself like a man who didn't need admiration. They knew he was a real estate agent now, the quiet one with the dog, but most didn't know that every house Caleb sold was chosen carefully, obsessively, as if ensuring no beam, no foundation, no structural detail could ever betray a human life the way a certain building once had. That memory still crept into his dreams like dust slipping through cracks. He had been the rescue captain then, responsible for a team of bright-eyed rookies. One of them, a wiry 23-year-old named Owen Price, with freckles across his nose and a habit of tapping his helmet when nervous, had been the one he never managed to pull out. Max had sensed the danger seconds before the collapse, giving a sharp, urgent howl. Caleb told Owen to fall back. Owen didn't. The concrete gave way. The guilt never did. Caleb's days in Silver Creek began with a routine he had crafted like a bandage. A slow walk with Max, checking 3 listings on his phone, and convincing himself that giving others a safe home was enough penance for failing to protect one man he still saw every time he closed his eyes. He set off down the gravel road from his cabin, Max trotting at his right side. The road wound toward the heart of Silver Creek, past acres of frost-coated meadow and clusters of homes with steep roofs bracing for the first heavy snow. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale gold band across the valley. Caleb inhaled the scent of pine needles and chimney smoke, a smell far calmer than the burning metal and dust from his past. As he walked, he spotted Mrs. Davenport, a widow in her 70s who owned a local antique store. She stood outside the shop, wrapped in a thick, plum-colored scarf, breathing warm air onto her gloved fingers. Her posture was small, but determined, and her silver curls poked out from beneath a knitted cap. She waved. "Morning, Caleb. Out early again, I see." He gave a polite nod. "Habit." She smiled warmly, though the corners of her eyes tightened with understanding. In a town as small as Silver Creek, everyone knew the difference between a man who loved the quiet and one who was simply hiding in it. Near his office, Caleb stopped by the coffee truck parked along Main Street. The barista, a thin and cheerful man named Trevor Mills, early 30s, with a mop of curled brown hair and a tattoo of a mountain range on his forearm, leaned out the window. Trevor had the easy charm of someone who believed every stranger had a story worth hearing. "The usual?" he asked, already reaching for a paper cup. Caleb nodded. Max sat with nearly military posture, earning a pat on the head from Trevor. "He looks sharper than I do before 9 a.m., Trevor joked. Caleb offered half a smile, the most he usually managed. "He's on duty." "Still? After all these years?" "Some jobs don't leave you," Caleb replied softly. He sipped the coffee and made his way to his real estate office, a renovated brick building with blue shutters and a window box of winter pansies that refused to surrender to the cold. The sign above the door read, "Heart and Pines Realty," though locals often joked it should say Max and that guy Caleb. Inside, his assistant, if she could be called that, had already arrived. Ruby Caswell, 55, tall, sharp-eyed, with short auburn hair that curled inward at the ends, sorted papers at her desk with a precision born not from perfectionism, but from surviving chaos. Ruby used to be a nurse at an emergency clinic. She had a way of speaking calmly, even when the world was on fire. It was why Caleb hired her, and why Max adored her. She wore a navy cardigan over a collared shirt and dark jeans, her posture straight and professional, though the small scar along her left jaw hinted at stories she didn't share easily. Ruby looked up. "Morning," she said. "You're early." "Couldn't sleep." "Nightmares again?" Caleb hesitated. Ruby's tone held no judgment, only recognition. She'd worked at the clinic the day Max came in with a torn shoulder years ago. She'd seen the look on Caleb's face, the kind worn by people who had lost too much. "Something like that," he finally answered. Before Ruby could respond, Max pricked his ears. An instinctive, alert posture Caleb recognized instantly. The dog's nose lifted slightly, tail falling still. Ruby noticed too. "What's he hearing?" "Don't know," Caleb murmured. Max took 3 quiet steps toward the door, muscles tight beneath his coat. Not fear, not aggression. Something in between. A disturbance, faint but undeniable. Caleb followed his gaze toward the frosted window. Outside, Main Street looked normal. Cars passing, people carrying grocery bags, the mountains looming calm and ancient beyond the rooftops. But Max didn't relax. His amber eyes fixed on something Caleb couldn't yet identify. Something just out of sight. Something coming. Caleb felt the hair rise along the back of his neck, not from cold, but from instinct. The same instinct he had spent years trying to bury. the same instinct that had saved him more times than he wanted to remember. Max gave a low, steady sound in his throat. Not a growl. A warning. Ruby stood slowly. "Caleb, what is it?" Caleb stared out at the quiet street, heart suddenly beating with the old, unwelcome rhythm of crisis. "I don't know," he said, voice low. "But Max does." And then, without any clear reason, the dog took one step back, ears flat, body tense, bracing for something neither of them could yet see. The morning after Max's strange warning unfurled into a thin, restless dawn. Caleb Hart found himself unable to shake the unease coiled beneath his ribs. It clung to him like damp air, persistent and without explanation. Even Max, usually steady as stone, paced lightly beside the desk at Hart and Pines Realty, ears twitching at every stray sound drifting in from Main Street. Caleb tried to settle into his routine, reviewing listings, confirming viewings, pretending the world still followed the quiet script he had forced upon it. But the phone rang with a tone too sharp for an ordinary workday, and something in him stiffened. The number displayed came from a law office he didn't recognize. When he answered, the voice on the other end belonged to Martin Hale, an estate attorney in his late 40s. Hale possessed a voice both measured and oddly gentle, the kind crafted from a lifetime of speaking to grieving families. As he spoke, Caleb pictured him automatically, tall, probably lean in that slightly underfed way lawyers often looked when they survived on coffee instead of meals. Dark hair slicked too deliberately to the side, a long face sharpened by stress and sleeplessness. Hale confirmed those assumptions later when Caleb met him, but on the call, his words alone carried the weight. "Mr. Hart," Hale began, "I'm sorry for the abrupt call. I'm contacting you regarding the estate of Howard Lane." Caleb froze, fingers curling slightly around the phone. "Howard?" he repeated, voice barely above a murmur. "Yes, he listed you as a designated beneficiary." Caleb leaned back in his chair, staring at the far wall as if it might supply a reason. He hadn't spoken to Howard Lane, an eccentric hydrologist with wild white hair and eyes that always seemed to map invisible currents in the air, in almost a decade. The man had lived like an odd hermit in the mountains, but carried a brilliant, restless mind. And once, long ago, during a violent flash flood on the outskirts of Silver Creek, Caleb and Max had found Howard clinging to a collapsed footbridge, water rising around his boots. Max had barked and braced. Caleb had crawled across the debris, and the two of them dragged Howard out before the current could swallow him whole. Howard had laughed afterward, shaken, drenched, but laughing, saying, "I knew the river would choose me someday, but not like that." Since then, he had occasionally sent Caleb cryptic letters containing sketches of water maps or oil-stained notes that seemed to predict geological shifts no one else believed in. Now, the attorney cleared his throat. "Mr. Lane passed away 3 weeks ago. His will names you, and only you, as inheritor of his personal property. Specifically, a residence located on Raven Ridge." The words felt surreal. Caleb glanced at Max, who had stopped pacing and was staring at him with intense, deliberate stillness. "What kind of residence?" Caleb asked slowly. "Well," Hale said, choosing words carefully, "it is unconventional. A cliffside home embedded directly into red rock formations. Mr. Lane described it as a listening station for the patient." Caleb almost laughed, but something in his chest tightened. And you're sure he wanted me to have it? Yes, Hale replied. Handwritten, underlined, twice. After arranging to sign the necessary papers, Caleb set the phone down and sat in silence. A cliffside house. Howard's house. It was the kind of inheritance no one expected and fewer still wanted. Remote, exposed, bizarre. Still, something tugged at him. A thin thread of obligation, or maybe recognition. Max nudged him, sensing the shift. All right, boy, Caleb whispered. Let's see what he left us. 2 hours later, Caleb and Max drove up the winding road toward Raven Ridge. The truck creaked over frosted gravel as the forest thinned into bare cliffs and crimson stone. The sky had turned an overcast gray, heavy with the first hints of incoming snow. Ravens swooped between the ridges, their silhouettes cutting sharp shapes against the pale light. The house appeared suddenly around a bend, a structure half wood and half carved into the mountain's side. Dark cedar planks framed the front, weathered by years of wind, while the back half disappeared directly into the rock, as though the mountain had swallowed it willingly. Long, narrow windows clung to the cliff like watchful eyes. A metal walkway connected the house to the path, suspended over a drop so sheer it made Caleb's stomach tighten. Max let out a quiet rumble, not warning, but curiosity. Caleb approached the house with a mix of fascination and unease. The wind seeped between the boards, creating a low hum that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It sounded almost like breathing. Inside, the air held the faint scent of dust and mineral stone. Papers lay stacked on a long table, each filled with Howard's looping handwriting, water pressure calculations, diagrams of underground channels. One note pinned above the desk read, "If you listen long enough, the earth will whisper back." Caleb felt something shift deep inside him, an echo of a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years, the beginning of purpose. Before diving deeper, he needed the official documents to confirm the property transfer. This led him back down the mountain to the Silver Creek Municipal Building, a pale yellow structure with a peaked roof and an American flag stiff in the winter wind. Inside, he found the records office manned by Lena Morales. Lena was in her mid-50s, though the calm wisdom in her dark eyes suggested she carried decades of stories her voice rarely told. Her hair, thick, black streaked with silver, was coiled into a low bun with a few gentle curls curling free around her temples. She had a warm, round face, and olive-toned skin etched with faint lines at the corners of her mouth, the kind carved by equal parts, laughter, and repeated bracing against disappointment. She was neither tall nor short, with a soft sturdiness to her posture, like someone who had learned to brace herself through storms that arrived without warning. Her cardigan, a knitted maroon piece slightly frayed at the sleeves, hugged her frame like a memory she refused to discard. When Caleb entered, she glanced up, and her lips curved into a knowing smile. "You must be here about Howard Lane." He blinked. "Word travels fast." "In a town this small?" Lena chuckled, her voice warm, low, and textured like brushed wool. "We hear a pine cone fall and wonder who dropped it." Caleb handed her the attorney's documents. Max sat beside him with impeccable posture, tail thumping once when Lena acknowledged him with a soft, approving nod. As she skimmed the papers, Lena's smile faded gradually, replaced by a thoughtful crease in her brow. Raven Ridge, she murmured. Beautiful place. Dangerous, though. And lately, a bit too popular. How do you mean? She closed the folder with deliberate care. Deep Spring Water, you've heard of them? Only vaguely. They're buying up land around Raven Ridge, quietly, aggressively. Her gaze darkened, and a subtle tension pulled at her shoulders. My husband, he died 3 years ago. Cancer. Doctors said it could have been anything. But the water in our well turned metallic months before. Deep Spring insisted there were no issues. Then they expanded their pipeline 2 miles up the ridge. Caleb inhaled, a sharp, involuntary breath. I'm sorry. She nodded once, a gesture that tried for composure but trembled at the edges. Thank you. But I tell you this because the price they offered for Howard's land was far too generous. When companies start overpaying, it usually means they want to hide what they're taking. Caleb felt a familiar heaviness spread through his chest. The same weight he carried when he realized a building scheduled for demolition was still occupied. The same weight that preceded disaster. Max shifted closer, resting his head gently against Caleb's knee. Lena watched the gesture with a soft, melancholy smile. He knows when something's wrong, doesn't he? He always has, Caleb replied quietly. She handed back the files. Be careful up there. Houses on cliffs hold secrets, but the ground beneath them, her voice lowered, holds the truth. Caleb left the municipal building with Max pacing at his heel. Snow had begun falling in small, hesitant flakes, drifting through the air like lost thoughts. As he reached the truck and placed his hand on the cold metal of the door, Max suddenly froze. His ears snapped upward. His tail stiffened. Caleb followed Max's gaze toward the far end of the street. A white utility truck sat parked beside the old post office, engine running, windows fogged from the inside. But no one stepped out. No logo on the side. No plates he could see. Then, just as Caleb narrowed his eyes, the truck's headlights blinked once, deliberate, too deliberate, before the vehicle rolled slowly away, slipping into the falling snow as if it had never been there. Caleb felt that old instinct surge through him again, quiet but unmistakable. Max pressed against his leg. Something was beginning, and it was waiting for them on Raven Ridge. The wind along Raven Ridge carried a colder bite the next morning, sharp enough to sting Caleb's cheeks as he climbed the narrow path toward the Cliffside house with Max trotting close beside him. Snow from the night before had crusted over the trail in thin, brittle sheets that cracked under his boots. Max's paws moved more carefully, nose lowered, inhaling the world as if each drifting scent were a new piece of a puzzle he had been studying for years. The unease from yesterday had not faded. Instead, it had settled deeper into Caleb's chest, humming there like a quiet warning. He wasn't sure if it came from the white utility truck that vanished in the snow, or from the peculiar emptiness in Howard Lane's cliff home, or from something even older, something buried. When Caleb unlocked the front door, Max went in first, ears pricked, tail low but steady. The interior felt colder than before, as if the house absorbed the night chill through its bones. Caleb stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and the subtle hum of wind through the narrow windows made the wooden beams creak softly in reply. The place smelled faintly of old cedar, stone, and the paper of aged notes still scattered across Howard's table. As Caleb moved deeper, Max suddenly stopped in the hallway leading toward the back of the house. The dog's muscles tightened beneath his coat. He sniffed the air, then padded toward the staircase descending to the lower level. Caleb followed, his breath leaving in small clouds. The basement was unfinished, the concrete floor cracked in places, the walls a mix of wood paneling and raw stone. It looked like Howard had intended renovations but abandoned them halfway. Max circled the floor twice before stopping at a section of mismatched tiles near the far corner. The area looked like nothing special, just a few dull ceramic squares, like the rest of the room. But Max's paw scratched at the edge insistently. "Easy," Caleb murmured, crouching beside him. He pressed his fingers to the tiles. One shifted slightly beneath the pressure. He pried them up. Something clicked beneath his hand. Metal, old but still functional. A small square of wood lifted on hidden hinges, revealing a seam in the floor. It was a trapdoor, cleverly disguised and reinforced with dark steel brackets. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Howard, what were you hiding down here?" He pulled the panel open, revealing a ladder bolted into a narrow shaft descending into dim light. Cold air rose from the gap, carrying the smell of damp earth and minerals. Max whined softly, but did not retreat. "Stay close," Caleb whispered, descending the ladder, one careful rung at a time. The space below was carved directly into the mountain. Rough stone walls formed a chamber barely tall enough for Caleb to stand upright. Lanterns, battery-powered, old but recently replaced, hung from hooks, casting amber light across the room. A long metal desk sat against one wall, holding headphones, a hydrophone receiver, and a mess of hand-labeled tapes. Maps, pinned on cork boards, crawled with lines and swirling notes drawn in black, red, and blue. Many were smeared with water stains, but the markings remained clear. Max stepped beside him, sniffing the air. Caleb traced his fingers across one of the maps. It showed Raven Ridge and the valley below, but with layers, arrows, pressure readings, channels twisting deep underground. At the top, in Howard's uneven handwriting, were the words, "The mountain speaks if you let it." Caleb ran his thumb over the phrase, remembering the way Howard used to mutter about listening to the earth like a living thing. Beside the receiver lay a final note in darker ink, the handwriting shakier than the rest. "If you can still hear the stones breathing, don't let them silence the mountain." Caleb swallowed, a knot forming in his throat. Howard had always had odd habits, but this was intentional, urgent, like the last message of a man who'd seen something he couldn't fight alone. He placed the headphones on his ears and flipped the switch. At first, there was only static. Then, faint and distant, came a low, resonant sound, almost musical, almost seized, alive. A pulsing rhythm, like a deep drum echoing through layers of rock. Max stiffened, ears twitching. Then the second sound cut through, steady, mechanical, wrong, a harsh, repetitive thudding, like the grinding pump of industrial equipment. Caleb removed the headphones, jaw tightening. "This isn't natural," he muttered, and he knew, instinctively, what it meant. Deep Spring. Before he had time to think further, a knock echoed faintly from upstairs, surprising both him and Max. The shepherd barked once, sharp and authoritative, bounding back up the ladder and toward the floor above. Caleb followed, heart rising in his throat. At the top of the stairs, he found Lena Morales standing in the open doorway, bundled in a thick olive green coat. Snow clung to her boots and the ends of her gray-streaked hair. She held a thermos in one hand, cheeks flushed from the climb up the ridge. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said, her voice warm but carrying a note of concern. "Your truck wasn't in town, so I figured I'd find you here." Caleb managed a faint smile. "You found us." Max nudged Lena's hand, earning a soft laugh as she bent to scratch behind his ears. Her touch was gentle and confident, as if she instinctively understood how to approach a working dog. "What brings you up here?" Caleb asked. Lena hesitated before stepping fully inside, closing the door to shut out the cold. "I thought you should see this." She handed him a folded brochure, fresh, glossy, and printed with the blue and green logo of Deep Spring Water. At the top, Community Information Session. Tonight at 6 p.m. Silver Creek Hall. Below, diagrams of pipelines, promises of job creation, and assurances of minimal environmental impact. "And this," she added, pulling another paper from her coat. It was a map, recent, crisp, with newly plotted drilling points down the ridge. One drilling site overlapped exactly with the red marks on Howard's underground map. Caleb's stomach dropped. "They're right over the fault line." "Yes." Lena's gaze was steady, though her fingers tightened faintly. "Howard warned the town council last year, but they dismissed him. Said he was getting paranoid in his old age." Caleb set the papers on the table. "He wasn't paranoid." "No," Lena whispered. "He wasn't." Max shifted uneasily, gaze darting between the two of them. Caleb felt the weight of a decision forming, the kind that pressed on his ribs like collapsing concrete. He looked toward the hydrophone machine below. "You want to hear what he recorded?" Lena nodded. Together, they descended into the hidden chamber, Max following. Caleb reactivated the hydrophone, handing her the headphones. Lena listened, her eyes widening as the mountain's subdued melody merged with the jarring mechanical rhythm. "That shouldn't be there," she breathed. "That's force. Something pushing into the rock." Caleb nodded grimly. If they hit the wrong chamber, pressure could shift. The whole ridge could destabilize. They exchanged a long, heavy look, two people realizing the danger threading beneath their feet. Later that evening, they attended the Deep Spring presentation at Silver Creek Hall. The building filled quickly, elderly residents in wool coats, young families clutching hand warmers, skeptical ranchers with muddy boots. The stage had a polished banner, smiling representatives, and a projection screen showing diagrams too clean to be honest. The presenter, a sharply dressed man named Daniel Locke, mid-40s, lean, with slick blonde hair and a grin engineered for sales, stepped up to the podium. His tailored suit fit too perfectly, and his voice carried the smooth cadence of someone who sold more dreams than truths. "Folks of Silver Creek," he began, spreading his arms, "we're here to bring progress, economic growth, good water, reliable infrastructure." But Caleb barely heard him. Max sat at his feet, uncharacteristically tense. Halfway through the presentation, Max's body snapped upright. His ears shot forward, nostrils flaring. He pulled hard at Caleb's sleeve. a sharp, urgent tug that jolted him. "What is it?" Caleb murmured. Max gave a low, vibrating growl. Then Caleb smelled it. Faint, metallic, wrong. Gas. Without hesitation, Caleb rose. "Everyone needs to move. Now!" The crowd turned in confusion. Daniel Locke blinked in irritation. But Max tugged harder, pulling Caleb toward a side corridor. Caleb followed and found it. A thin hiss leaked from a cracked heating pipe, the air shimmering faintly. If a spark had touched it, Caleb didn't finish the thought. He shouted, "Evacuate the hall! Gas leak! Move!" Panic surged, but the townspeople trusted his voice, and within minutes they streamed out into the cold. Ruby Caswell helped usher seniors through the front entrance. Trevor pulled fire alarms manually, and Lena supported two stumbling elders down the steps. When the hall finally emptied, Locke stared at Caleb, pale beneath his polished smile. "You caused unnecessary alarm," he hissed. Caleb faced him steadily. "Max warned me. Your system almost killed everyone in this room." Locke's eyes narrowed, cold, calculating, but he said nothing, merely straightened his suit and walked out into the storm. Caleb stood with Max in the doorway, heart pounding, watching snow swirl beneath the streetlights. The immediate danger had passed, but something deeper had shifted, like the first tremor of a larger collapse. Max pressed against him, trembling with leftover adrenaline. Caleb whispered, "Good boy." But even as he said it, he knew. This was only the beginning. The morning after the gas leak, Silver Creek woke beneath a sky washed pale by approaching winter, the kind of dawn whose light seemed too thin to warm anything, but still tried its best. A low fog clung to rooftops and drifted lazily between pine trunks, softening the sharp outline of the ridge. Caleb stepped outside the Cliffside house with Max padding close to his boots, feeling the weight of yesterday pressing behind his ribs like an old injury. Wikiswarm. He could still hear the frantic shuffle of feet as the townspeople evacuated the hall. The quiet tremor in Lena's breath when she realized how close they had come to disaster, and the way Daniel Locke's smile fell apart at the edges when confronted with something he could not spin. Max sniffed the air, ears tilted back in thought, as if the dog too sensed that the day had woken with a question lodged under its tongue. Caleb rubbed the shepherd's neck, feeling the familiar scars beneath his thick fur, reminders of a life Max had fought hard for, reminders that survival was not a quiet matter. By the time Caleb and Max reached the sheriff's small office in town, the local news van was already parked outside. A reporter in a beige puff jacket, short, sprightly, with a bob of sandy hair and a pair of round glasses perched on her small nose, stood beside her cameraman, speaking animatedly. When she saw Caleb, she hurried toward him, waving a microphone with an enthusiasm that made Max stiffen. "Mr. Hart, Cherie Whitman, KDC Mountain News. Can you spare a moment? The gas leak last night. People are calling it a miracle you caught it." Caleb shook his head, uneasy with the attention. "It wasn't a miracle. It was my dog." Cherie beamed, lowering the mic to glance at Max. "Then he's quite the hero. One more question, if you don't mind. Did you smell the leak first, or did your dog alert you?" "Max alerted me," Caleb answered quietly. "That's all you need." Cherie pressed her lips together as if expecting a longer answer, but something in Caleb's eyes, An instinctive distance made her step back politely. Max nudged his owner's thigh, urging him away from the crowd forming around the town hall, and Caleb followed the tug gratefully. News traveled fast in a small town. By noon, the sheriff, a heavy-set man in his early 50s named Owen Harker, with salt and pepper whiskers and the gruff patience of someone who had raised 3 sons, called to check on him. Owen stood 6 feet tall, broad shoulders stretching his brown flannel jacket, and had the tired eyes of a man who'd seen far too much domestic chaos, but never quite enough justice to balance it. His voice crackled through the radio in Caleb's truck. "Caleb, folks want to thank you, but Deep Spring's already doing damage control. They're blaming outdated heating, nothing more. Just wanted you to know." Caleb responded with a non-committal grunt. He wasn't surprised. Deep Spring had too much at stake to admit negligence or pressure-related faults. Not when there were millions tied to the pipeline plan. On the drive back to Raven Ridge, the road grew narrower and lined with evergreens whose branches sagged under new snow. The sky deepened into a dull silver gray. Caleb's thoughts drifted to the hydrophone chamber beneath the house. How the mountain's voice had changed hours before the leak, tightening like a throat being strangled. He didn't know if the two events were connected, but the timing gnawed at him. The house appeared like an outcropping grown from the cliff itself, its wooden exterior pressed against the mountain's stone flank. When he stepped inside, the familiar cold greeted him. But there was something else too, a tension hovering just above the floorboards. Lena was in the kitchen, where yellow lamplight pooled warmly over old counters. She wore a thick navy sweater and a long charcoal skirt, her graying hair tied loosely behind her. She held a small tin mug in both hands, tendons visible beneath her soft skin. Her figure was neither fragile nor imposing, something in between, shaped by quiet strength and years of carrying responsibility alone. Her brown eyes, framed by faint crow's feet, lifted to meet Caleb's. "You're back," she said softly. "I am," he murmured, shrugging off his coat. Max trotted ahead to inspect the house, leaving a trail of melting snow droplets behind him. Lena gestured toward the coat hanger. "I made coffee. Thought you could use it." Caleb accepted the mug, noticing Lena's fingers trembled slightly. Whether from cold or from something heavier, he couldn't tell. At the table, papers spread before her. Howard's notes, last night's brochure, and copies of water reports she'd pulled from town archives. Her expression tightened with worry as she glanced at the mess. "Deep Spring issued a statement," she said. "They're calling the leak an accident caused by an old heating line that the town failed to maintain." Caleb let out a humorless breath. "Of course they are." "They didn't mention you," she added. "I didn't expect them to." She studied him. "Are you all right?" Caleb hesitated. He wasn't used to the question, nor the sincerity behind it. Most people asked out of politeness, not interest, but Lena held his gaze and waited without pressuring him. "I don't know," he finally answered. "When I smelled the gas and Max pulled me to the back room, it felt like déjà vu." He rubbed his forehead with his thumb. The night of the collapse, the sound of concrete, the smell of dust the moment I hesitated just long enough for someone else to pay for it. Lena put down her mug slowly. "Caleb, you didn't cause that. I was the one in charge. I trusted the building report over Max's alert. If I had trusted my instincts instead of the damned paperwork," his chest tightened, "he'd still be alive." Silence stretched, filled only by the soft hum of the house settling. Max, lying near the table, lifted his head as if sensing tension, his amber eyes calm yet attentive. Lena reached out, placing her hand gently over Caleb's. Her touch was steady, warm. You made a judgment call in a dangerous situation. That doesn't make you a villain. Caleb's voice cracked. It feels like one. Lena looked down at her intertwined fingers, her tone softening even more. My husband, Matteo. Her voice faltered, throat tightening as she inhaled deeply. He drank from our well for years. We didn't know anything was wrong until the water started tasting metallic. The company at that time said everything was within regulation, safe, and Matteo trusted them. Her eyes glistened but did not spill tears. 6 months later, we found out about the contamination. Too late. The cancer had already spread. Caleb's stomach nodded. Lena, I'm so sorry. He believed in systems too. He believed in people doing the right thing. And when he realized they hadn't, her jaw clenched ever so slightly. I think part of him gave up before his body did. They sat in silence again, grief overlapping like two notes of the same chord, different yet echoing. Snow began to fall outside, flakes drifting slowly past the window. Max shifted closer, resting his head on Caleb's foot like a grounding weight. So, Lena finally murmured, the question is, what happens if you stay silent again? Caleb stared into his coffee. Someone else pays for it. Maybe an entire town, she whispered. He nodded. Lena moved her hand back, but only slightly, as though reluctant to sever the fragile connection that had formed between them. She cleared her throat gently. I believe you, Caleb. And I think Howard tried to warn all of us long before today. Deep Spring was measuring something last night, Caleb said suddenly. He walked to the window, pointing downward to the tree line where shadows pooled thickly. A truck parked there, lights off, engine off. I saw silhouettes with drilling rods. Lena joined him, standing close enough that Caleb could feel the warmth radiating from her. Her brows furrowed. Then they know exactly where the weak points are. He nodded grimly. And they're pushing them. They moved to the hydrophone room together. Caleb switched on the machine. The same throaty hum filled the chamber, but now it quivered, stuttering unevenly like a strained heartbeat. Lena closed her eyes, listening. Max stood between them, tense, ears flicking at every vibration. The mountain sounds sick, Lena whispered. Caleb felt the truth settle inside him like a stone. We can't wait for them to break it. Back upstairs, Lena poured more coffee, though both had forgotten the warmth of the first mugs. They sat by the window while snow whirled outside. Max curled at their feet. Words became softer, sparser, but something gentle threaded through them. Something that made the room feel less empty. Caleb glanced at Lena, noticing the tired strength in her posture, the resilience carved into every line of her face. She met his gaze, equally searching. For a moment, the silence between them wasn't silence at all, but recognition. Two people carrying different forms of loss, finding in each other a reason to steady their breaths. Max sighed contentedly, pressing his flank against Caleb's leg. What do we do now? Lena asked, voice low. Caleb looked toward the mountainside, snow dancing in the wind like whispering spirits. We listen, he said, and then we act. Outside, a faint rumble rolled across the ridge. Not thunder, not wind, something deeper. Lena stiffened. Did you hear that? Caleb nodded slowly, the hairs on his arms rising. Yeah. He rose from his chair. And that wasn't natural. Max shot to his feet, muscles coiled. The mountain had spoken again. Except this time, it sounded like a warning. The storm arrived without grace. No gentle warning, no slow gathering of clouds. Just a violent sweep of white swallowing the horizon, as if some ancient hand had dragged a curtain of ice across the sky. Snow hammered against the cliffside house in sheets so dense they blurred the world beyond the porch into nothing more than shifting silhouettes. The wind shrieked against the wooden beams, rattling the windows until the glass trembled under its rage. It was late winter, yet the storm felt like something torn from deep February, colder than the season allowed, heavier than the valley had seen in years. Caleb Hart stood in the doorway of the cliffside house, boots planted firmly, shoulders squared in that instinctive, protective stance that never left him, not even after leaving the rescue unit. His breath fogged before him, rising like a small ghost that vanished instantly in the gale. Max pressed against his leg, fur bristling, body tense yet steady. The shepherd's amber eyes narrowed toward the ridgeline, catching what Caleb could not. Vibrations beneath the surface of the earth, faint but urgent, threading through the storm's roar. Inside, the wooden floorboards groaned with each burst of wind. Lena, wrapped in a thick flannel coat that reached her knees, was securing blankets around the exposed seams of the windows. Strands of gray hair had fallen loose from her braid, catching the lamplight like threads of silver. She was working quietly but quickly. Lena did everything that way, with a purposeful calm that belied the tremor beneath her steady exterior. Years of loss had taught her composure, not coldness. Caleb, she called, her low voice firm but edged with worry. The hydrophone room. It's humming louder than before. He nodded grimly. I heard it from out here. The two descended the ladder into the chamber below. The storm's rage dulled to a distant roar underground, replaced by a sound far more unsettling. The hydrophone's speaker emitted a jagged, uneven pattern, nothing like the deep, melodic hum it once carried. The resonance trembled as though the mountain itself were in pain. Caleb placed a hand on the stone wall. It felt wrong, alive, but not whole. Max paced in a tight circle, nails tapping against the rock, tail stiff as a rod. His breath came shallow, ears turning sharply with each distorted tremor. Lena picked up Howard's old notebook, flipping to a page marked with a faded red tab. She read aloud, voice faint under the mechanical distortion. If the water's pulse breaks, if it starts sounding like fractured glass, then they've drilled into the weakness. The mountain won't hold long once pressure shifts. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. They've hit it. A sharp crack echoed overhead, faint but distinct, like a knuckle rapping against the stone. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Max froze, nose lifted, pupils wide. We need the council to shut them down now, Caleb muttered, already climbing the ladder, before they snapped the whole ridge in half. The drive into Silver Creek was a battle. Snow whipped across the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. The truck's engine groaned on steep inclines, tires skidding across patches of ice that hid under freshly fallen snow. Max sat upright in the passenger seat, muscles coiled, gaze fixed forward. The shepherd's instinct, his trained sense of imminent danger, was fully awake. When they reached the town hall, the parking lot was nearly empty. Caleb stormed inside, boots leaving wet prints across the hardwood floor. Several council members sat huddled near a space heater, 3 men and a woman, all in their 60s and 70s, wrapped in scarves and coats, faces tired from weeks of public complaints and the pressure of Deep Spring's polished persuasion. Councilman Walter Briggs, a tall man with a once sturdy build, now softened by age, rubbed his brow with weathered fingers. Walter's hair, a thinning wave of white, clung to his head in damp patches from melted snow. His thick mustache, tinged yellow from decades of pipe smoking, twitched impatiently when he saw Caleb. "What now, Hart?" Walter sighed. His voice was gravelly, a product of both age and exhaustion. "We're aware of the storm. This isn't about the storm," Caleb said, stepping forward. Max stood beside him, alert. "Deep Spring hit the weak section of the ridge. The hydrophone readings are unstable. The mountain's shifting. You need to shut them down today." Councilwoman Meredith Hale, a sharp-boned woman with thin lips and a gray bob cut precisely under her jawline, folded her arms. "We can't vote on anything without evidence beyond old maps and your interpretation of underground noise." "Howard Lane wasn't just drawing pictures," Caleb snapped. "He mapped water veins for 20 years. He knew this ridge better than all of us combined." Walter's shoulders slumped. "We don't doubt his heart or your intentions, Caleb. But you're asking us to oppose a corporation with legal teams bigger than this entire county. We need time." Caleb stared at them, disbelief knotting his chest. Time is exactly what we don't have. Silence pressed heavily around them. The space heater hummed. Outside, the storm howled. Finally, Walter shook his head. "Bring us more data, something verifiable. Then we'll meet again." Caleb knew it was the kind of answer city councils gave when they wanted to help, but lacked the courage to act. He felt Max lean into his leg, grounding him. The shepherd's breath was steady, but his eyes flicked toward the door, restless, uneasy. On the drive back up the mountain, visibility dropped to barely 5 feet. Snow thickened into a near-solid curtain, gusts slapping the truck sideways. Max pressed close, growling under his breath at something beyond the storm. When they reached the Cliffside house, Lena stood under the sheltered porch, coat flapping in the wind. She looked smaller against the fury of the elements, her figure framed by the rocking lantern beside the door. But her stance, feet firmly planted, shoulders squared, was resolute. "You were right," she shouted over the storm as Caleb stumbled up the steps. The reading spiked, then collapsed. Max barked sharply, spinning toward the valley. The earth trembled, just once. A shallow shudder, subtle yet unmistakable, like a warning tap on the shoulder of the world. Lena grabbed the railing. That wasn't wind. No, it wasn't. Before Caleb could respond, his phone buzzed violently in his coat pocket. An emergency alert. The message was short, through the county broadcast channel. Ground shaking near Riverbend Mobile Park. Water contamination reported. Elderly residents trapped by flooding. Caleb's heart clenched. The Riverbend Mobile Park was home to retirees, older couples living on fixed incomes, widows and small single wides, veterans like him who didn't have anywhere else to go. Max was already bounding down the porch steps toward the truck, barking insistently. Caleb looked at Lena. She nodded without needing explanation. "Go." He hesitated for a fraction of a breath, wanting to say something more. something honest about the tightness in his chest whenever she looked at him with trust and fear tangled together. But the moment wasn't theirs to claim. Not now. The storm pressed them onward. Lena grabbed a thick rope from a hook near the door, thrusting it into Caleb's hands. "Take this. You might need it." Caleb swallowed hard, gripping her wrist briefly, an unspoken promise passing between them. Then he ran to the truck, Max already inside, waiting. As the snow thickened into a blinding white wall, Caleb started the engine. Max lifted his head, staring into the storm as if he could see through it. "We're going," Caleb said. Max answered with a low, determined bark. They drove straight into the heart of the blizzard, toward the trembling ground, the tainted water, and the people who needed them. And deep beneath Raven Ridge, something cracked again. This time, louder. The storm had not softened. If anything, it had grown more vicious, swirling through the valley like a creature made of snow and breathless fury. Caleb's truck crawled along the narrowing road toward Riverbend Mobile Park, its headlights cutting only a thin path through the whiteout. Max braced himself with each jolt, claws gripping the rubber floor mat. The shepherd's ears twitched at sounds Caleb could not yet hear. Earth moaning, water shifting, things that lived beneath the surface roaring awake. As they descended into the lower valley, the road disappeared beneath a slurry of mud, snowmelt, and broken asphalt. The mobile park sprawled ahead in scattered shadows. Rows of aging trailers, their aluminum skins shaking under the storm. Several porch lights flickered weakly. Others had gone out entirely. Then Caleb saw it. Half the main road into the park had collapsed into a violent sink of churning mud. What used to be a paved entrance now resembled the open mouth of a wounded animal. Earth split wide, swallowing anything that strayed too close. A white utility truck, Deep Spring's unmistakable make, had been caught in the collapse. Its front end was buried in mud, while the rear lifted upward at a sickening angle. Only the tip of one headlight remained visible, glowing weakly like a half-drowned star. Caleb slammed the truck into park. "Come on, Max." Max leapt out instantly, landing in knee-deep sludge. It splashed up his legs, thick, freezing, unforgiving. He shook himself once before pressing forward. A faint voice carried through the wind. A man's voice, strained and raw. "Help! Someone, please!" Another voice, higher, choked by panic. "We're stuck! God, we're stuck!" Caleb's pulse kicked into the familiar rhythm of crisis, not the panicked beat of fear, but the sharp, directive thrum of a man who had once commanded rescue teams with seconds to spare. He scanned the chaos quickly. A street lamp had toppled, but its base remained intact. A thick cement post partially buried, but miraculously upright. Perfect anchor. Caleb grabbed the coil of rope Lena had given him, looping one end around the intact portion of the pole. He tested the knot with a sharp pull. It held. "Max," he called. The dog already understood. He took the loose end of rope in his mouth, turned toward the trench, and pulled it taut, his powerful neck muscles flexing beneath his fur. The two moved as one. Caleb slid into the mud, gripping the rope with one hand to steady himself while Max guided the tension. The sludge felt alive, pulling at his legs like thick hands trying to drag him under. Each step was a fight. Frozen water seeped into his boots. His thighs burned, but he pushed forward. When he reached the truck, he braced himself against the tilted door and shouted, "I'm Caleb Hart. I'm with rescue. Are you injured?" A man inside, a Deep Spring worker in his early 30s, pale, shaking, pressed his face to the cracked window. He had a short, messy beard, sandy brown hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and mud, and frantic eyes that darted like trapped birds. His voice trembled from shock. We we hit the road, and it opened up," he gasped. "Dan's in the passenger seat. He's unconscious." Caleb's stomach tightened. "Move back," he ordered. Using his shoulder, he rammed the door. Mud sucked at the hinges, resisting him. He rammed again. The metal groaned. Max barked, high and urgent. Caleb gave one last shove with all his weight. The door snapped open. A surge of mud and gas-filled air burst out, slamming into Caleb's chest. He staggered, coughing. The smell was unmistakable, natural gas leaking into the slurry. His skin prickled with adrenaline. "Get out now!" he shouted. The conscious worker scrambled out, grabbing the rope Max held. Caleb turned to the passenger side. Inside, the second man, Daniel Torres, judging by the embroidered name tag, hung limp, his head lolling. He was younger, maybe 28, with olive skin, thick black hair, and the lean build of someone who climbed more than he sat. Now he was barely breathing. Caleb reached in, getting one arm under the man's shoulders. Max barked again, frantic. Caleb smelled it too. The gas leak was worsening. If the storm sparked static, if the ground shifted again, they had minutes, maybe less. "Come on, kid," Caleb muttered, hauling Torres out. He slung the man's arm around his shoulders and dragged him toward the rope. Max stepped backward, pulling with all his strength, guiding them toward firmer ground. Just as Caleb lifted Torres free of the truck's frame, the mud beneath them heaved. A shudder rippled through the earth. Max's eyes widened. He barked, a broken, terrified sound Caleb had only heard once before, in the seconds before a building collapsed years ago. "Move!" Caleb roared. He clutched Torres, stumbling backward as the mud line split again. A wide section of the road dropped with a roar, swallowing the place Caleb had stood not 10 seconds earlier. The truck lurched once, groaned, and slid into the pit with a thunderous splash. Max lunged forward, tugging the rope, anchoring Caleb with all the force in his body. They made it to solid ground just before the edge crumbled. Caleb fell to his knees, pulling Torres fully out of the mud. The man was breathing, shallow but present. Behind them, another scream pierced the storm, this time from deeper inside the mobile park. A woman's voice, older, frail. "Help! Anyone! Help me!" Caleb exchanged a glance with Max. They weren't done. He secured Torres and the first worker under a protected awning by the park's laundry shed, wrapping them in emergency blankets he kept in the truck. The conscious one muttered weakly, "There's someone else. Trailer 9. The ground shook. She couldn't get out. I tried." Then he pulled something from his coat, a small USB drive wrapped tightly in a plastic evidence bag. His hand shook as he pressed it into Caleb's palm. His voice cracked. "They knew. They knew the ridge was unstable. They forced us to drill anyway. I couldn't stay quiet anymore." Caleb stared at the drive, pulse hammering. This was the proof the council needed. Proof someone had tried to hide. He pocketed it, squeezing the worker's shoulder once. You did the right thing. No time for more. Trailer 9 waited. Mud flooded the narrow pathways between trailers. Some had shifted off their foundations, tilted like discarded toys. Max moved ahead, nose to the air, navigating by scent alone. They found her, an elderly woman in her 70s, tiny and bird-like, with thinning white hair plastered to her scalp. Her mobile home had sunk halfway into a slush pit, its front door jammed. She was banging on the window, face streaked with tears. Max barked sharply to reassure her. Caleb smashed the glass with the handle of his multi-tool. Cold wind and sleet slashed into the trailer. "I'm getting you out," he called over the storm. Her name tag, embroidered on a faded pink sweater, read Mrs. Alden. She was trembling violently, her hands mottled with age spots, veins stark against pale skin. Her voice cracked with gratitude and terror. I can't feel my legs," she whispered. I thought no one would come." Caleb wrapped his arms around her carefully. She was feather light, but fragile as thawing ice. Max backed up slowly, guiding Caleb's steps again. The shepherd's instincts razor sharp. The mud around the trailer rippled. A distant boom echoed through the valley. Not thunder, earth. Caleb knew that sound. A fracture line extending. "Hold on," he whispered. Mrs. Alden clung to him, her breath warm against his shoulder. Max barked once, sharp, warning. The ground buckled. Caleb sprinted, dragging the woman toward higher ground as Max ran beside him. The mud behind them caved inward, swallowing the twisted trailer in a single violent pull. Mrs. Alden sobbed, but held tight. At the top of the hill, Caleb set her down on dry snow. Her skin was blue at the knuckles, but she was alive. "Thank you," she whispered. Then Caleb turned, just in time to see Max limp, his right back leg buckling. Blood streaked the fur along his foreleg. "Max!" Caleb dropped beside him, hands trembling as they checked for deeper injury. Max licked his wrist, tail thumping weakly. He wasn't broken, but he was hurt, exhausted, and shaking. Caleb pressed his forehead to Max's. "You saved all of us," he whispered, voice cracking. "You did it, buddy." Sirens wailed in the distance. Ambulances, sheriff's cars, maybe even the volunteer fire crew fighting their way through the storm. The valley glowed faintly with emergency lights, cutting through the swirling white. For the first time since the storm began, Caleb exhaled, long, shaky, full of something, like relief. Above them, the ridge groaned again. But this time, not in pain. Almost as if grateful. The storm passed, not suddenly, but with the slow reluctance of a giant too weary to keep fighting. Snow thinned into scattered flakes. The sky lifted from iron gray to washed white, and the valley of Silver Creek breathed again. Emergency crews cleared the final debris around Riverbend Mobile Park, while residents, bundled in coats and blankets, stood in clusters, shaken but alive. In the distance, the fractured ridge loomed beneath the dawn light like a scar slowly knitting itself shut. For Caleb Hart, the weeks that followed blurred into a long, measured rhythm of paperwork, interviews, and testimony. State investigators descended on Silver Creek, men and women in heavy boots and bright vests, carrying clipboards and small digital scanners. One of them, A tall, wiry man named Ethan Rayner, mid-40s, with narrow features, a peppered goatee, and the guarded eyes of someone who had spent years sorting lies from truth, introduced himself the morning after the collapse. "Mr. Hart?" he asked, stepping forward in a dark parka dusted with frost. "I am lead investigator Rayner, with the State Environmental Protection Unit." Rayner's handshake was firm, but not aggressive. He spoke with a steady baritone, clipped at the edges, as though he valued time too highly to waste words. A small scar ran from his right temple to his cheekbone, old, faint, but hinting at a past not entirely bureaucratic. Caleb nodded. Max stood beside him, hind leg wrapped in a temporary brace, tail still wagging despite discomfort. Rayner looked at the dog with mild surprise. "This him? The one who spotted the gas leak and helped during the mudslide?" Caleb rested his palm on Max's head. "That's him." Rayner crouched, carefully, not reaching out until Max leaned forward to sniff him. "Then we owe you both more than a thank you." Behind him, a group of analysts unrolled maps across the hood of a state vehicle. Rayner gestured toward them. "Your USB drive, plus the papers from Howard Lane, gave us enough probable cause to freeze Deep Springs operations. We're conducting a full audit." Caleb felt a quiet exhale loosen the knots in his chest. "And the ridge?" he asked. Rayner straightened, his expression shifting. "Stabilizing for now. But we were days from a catastrophic break. Deep Spring drilled exactly where Lane told them not to. They knew the risk." Lena, who had been standing a few feet away with a folder of town documents pressed to her chest, stepped closer. The winter sunlight painted soft highlights across her graying hair, tucked beneath a woven beret that made her look gentler, not older. Her eyes, brown, flecked with honey, held gratitude and something deeper. "So, they'll be held responsible?" she asked. Rayner nodded. "We're filing charges, and will recommend the town receive environmental reparations. You all went through hell. You shouldn't have to pay for it." Over the next few days, Silver Creek drifted into a fragile calm. Rumors softened into conversation. The elderly residents from Riverbend sent Caleb casseroles, knitted scarves, handwritten cards. Mrs. Alden, now moved into her daughter's home, mailed a photo of Max licking her cheek with a scribbled note, "My hero wears fur." But it wasn't until the town council hosted a modest recognition ceremony. No stage, no banners, just townspeople gathered outside the hall, under a sky turning peach with dusk, that the weight of everything settled into place. Councilman Walter Briggs cleared his throat at the podium, adjusting his glasses with hands that seemed to shake more than usual. "Caleb Hart and his partner Max," he began, "reminded us that listening, truly listening, to the land matters as much as listening to each other." Max sat beside Caleb, ears twitching, behaving with the stoic dignity of a dog who somehow understood he was being talked about. Meredith Hale stepped forward, her usually cool demeanor softening. "We can't repay what you two have done for this town," she said, "but we can remember, and we will." Behind her hung a small wooden plaque carved by a local craftsman. "Silver Creek thanks Caleb and Max Hart for hearing what others missed." Caleb did not speak. Could not. The knot in his throat was too thick. He simply squeezed Max's shoulder gently, and the dog pressed back. That night, they visited the veterinarian. Dr. Mira Thompson, a woman in her late 50s with thick auburn curls tied back in a practical bun, freckles dusting her pale cheeks, and a voice both brisk and kind, examined Max with meticulous care. She wore rectangular glasses perched low on her nose and had the slightly hunched posture of someone who'd spent decades leaning over exam tables. "He's a tough boy," she declared after checking Max's movement. "A bit of swelling, mild ligament strain, some cuts. He'll limp when it's cold, but he'll still run, still climb, still annoy squirrels. He'll be himself." Caleb let out a breath he felt he'd held since the mudslide. "Thank you." Mira smiled gently, patting Max's head. "Thank him. He saved a town." Days later, after Deep Spring formally withdrew, after the investigators left, after the valley quieted and the winter sky softened into unbroken blue, Caleb made a decision he'd been circling for weeks. He didn't sell the Cliffside house. He moved into it. He and Max spent a week cleaning, organizing, repairing weather-beaten sections. The lower chamber, the listening room, became his center of gravity. He installed new shelves, reinforced the ladder, rewired the overhead lights. But at the heart of the room, he kept Howard's old hydrophone receiver, its blue metal casing faded but still reliable, like a relic with a beating heart. Word spread. Teachers asked if children might visit to learn about the mountain's water veins. Lena, who split her time between the town archives and part-time library work, began scheduling small tours. Her presence in the Cliffside house grew more frequent, sometimes carrying stacks of maps, sometimes bringing stew in old ceramic pots, sometimes simply arriving with that quiet smile that seemed to anchor the room. One late afternoon, pale gold sunlight spilled across the porch. Max stretched across two wooden chairs, his tail hanging lazily over the edge. His fur caught the light, glowing like warm honey. He lay with his head on Lena's knee, eyes half closed, perfectly content. Caleb sat opposite them, elbows resting on his thighs. He was telling Lena about a rescue from his rookie years. His voice calm, threaded with equal parts reverence and humor. He spoke not as a man confessing old wounds, but as someone tidying memories he had once locked away, brushing the dust off them without fear. Lena listened intently. Occasionally, she laughed softly, a low, warm sound, like turning pages in a well-loved book. Her hand rested gently on Max's shoulder, fingers stroking the soft patch behind his ear. "You know," she said after a pause, "you tell these stories differently now." Caleb tilted his head. "Differently how?" "Before they sounded heavy, like they were pulling you under." She tapped her chest. "Now they sound like part of you, not all of you." Caleb looked at her, really looked. The soft creases beside her eyes, the resilience etched into her posture, the warmth in her smile, a steadiness he hadn't known he needed. "I think," he murmured, "I'm learning how to stay, not just exist." Lena brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, cheeks warming. "Silver Creek is better with you here." Max thumped his tail approvingly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching as dusk painted the ridge in lavender and rose. Below them, the hydrophone's faint hum drifted through the floorboards. Not distressed anymore, but steady, rhythmic, almost melodic. The mountain had found its voice again. Caleb exhaled slowly, letting the sound wash through him. "I used to tell myself," he said softly, "that I'd never sell a house to myself, because I didn't deserve a home." He chuckled, shaking his head as he leaned back in his chair. Turns out, I finally found the right one. Lena smiled, eyes warm. You did? He glanced at Max, and he agrees. Max released a long, contented sigh, the kind a weary soul gives when it decides to stay instead of wander. The lantern beside them flickered to life as the last of the daylight faded. Far below, the mountain whispered in its quiet, steady language. For the first time in years, Caleb felt like he was exactly where he belonged. In the end, Caleb believed he had lost the best parts of himself, his purpose, his courage, even the simple ability to stay anywhere long enough to call it home. But somewhere between the cracking earth, the storm-torn night, and the trembling song of the mountain, something unexpected happened. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a blinding miracle. It was a faithful dog, pulling him back from danger. A woman with a steady heart offering quiet companionship, and a whisper rising from the depths of the earth, telling him to listen. Some people would call it luck, but those who have lived enough life know this truth. Sometimes God doesn't speak through lightning. He speaks through the smallest signs. A tug on your sleeve at the right second. A voice telling you to turn back. A stranger showing up when your strength is gone. A dog who refuses to let you walk alone. Max saved Caleb more times than he realized, but perhaps the greatest rescue of all was this. God used a loyal old shepherd to guide a weary man back to himself. And if this story touched your heart, maybe it's because deep inside, you already know that the same thing can happen in our everyday lives. In quiet hours, in moments of doubt, in the places where we feel broken or tired or unseen. God is still working in the subtle spaces, still sending help in ways we may not recognize at first, still whispering through the cracks of ordinary days. If Caleb and Max reminded you of that, if they stirred even a small spark of hope, then I invite you to pause for one simple prayer. May God stand beside you. May He guide your steps when the path feels uncertain. May He place a Max in your life when you most need a companion. And may He bless you with the quiet miracles you didn't even know you were waiting for. If this story brought you comfort or encouragement, please share it with someone who might need a reminder of God's gentle presence. Leave a comment with a prayer or reflection from your heart. Subscribe to stay close to more stories of hope, healing, and everyday grace. May God bless you and your loved ones. Today, tomorrow, and every day your heart feels heavy. You are not alone.